I'll try as hard as I can, but I think there is more information. So if you want to, I'll try to make it as concise as possible, but if you want to hear the good stuff, you need to give me a little bit more time. The topic of my presentation is underground coal gasification, and I'll be focusing more on chemicals than power, because we shouldn't forget that in Indian conditions, power is very important, but you also don't have or very little sources of indigenous hydrocarbons that can be used in the country. As a result, consumption of hydrocarbons in India per capita is extremely low, and you're spending a lot of hard currency on this on import of the hydrocarbons. So in the beginning, there are several parts in my presentation. In the beginning, I'll be talking about general issues, mostly what was discussed at this conference yesterday. This is about the use of coal and the fate of coal in the future. So I just want to submit to you that the climate, the world climate, will be decided in Asia for the next 50 years. Why? This is a projection of population growth. And all population growth is happening in the, as UN puts it, less developed countries. There's no growth in the OECD countries. If you look at the primary energy consumption, it is just parallel to population growth because people consume energy. That's how we exist. The same, there's practically no growth in OECD countries, and all the world growth is parallel to primary energy consumption in the developing world. There is another thing which we are not talking about here, and this is quality of life. We know that about 300 million people in India don't have access to electricity. So when we are talking about trying to restrict carbon emissions, when we're talking about trying to curb the use of carbon in the economy, we should remember that you cannot tell a starving person to drink water if you are fed yourself. So this is the position which I see on the part of the West generally and OECD countries that come to India and tell India what they need to eat, how they need to produce their energy, and they're telling this to people who are actually, sleeping in the street under the rug. The food is extremely important part of the carbon story. We are carbon creatures. We cannot consume solar. We cannot consume wind. We have to consume carbon. As we consume carbon, it's a wasteful process, and the carbon emissions, in fact, are actually proportional to the number of people and to quality of life. So the better, the more nutritious your diet is, the higher your own carbon emissions will be. So to tell people that, we're consuming and emitting carbon at the level of 16 tons of CO2 per person a year, and you have to remain at the level of 1 ton of CO2 a year, I think it is immoral. So there should be a solution that actually helps people and serves what is called consumption and energy justice, and in the same time addresses the issue of global warming. So the situation at the moment is that Asia is the largest consumer of world coal. And one of the largest consumers is India. This will remain. This is information from IEA. You can see that this last chart, the coal-fired power stations will reduce towards 2040 in the developed world, and they actually increasing, not only for power, but other uses of coal in the developing world. And Asia is leading the charge there. This is the graph that hopefully will be clear to you, and it says pretty simple thing. What we plotted here is consumption of oil by countries per capita, and emissions of carbon, not CO2, carbon, as function of GDP per capita. What this slide shows, the countries who have, OECD countries primarily, who have the funds to pay for oil, petroleum and hydrocarbons, they have unproportionately lower emissions that poorer countries that have to forced to use coal as their primary source of energy. India is the third largest CO2 emitter in the world, and it is growing at the rate of about 5.5% a year at the moment. Coal remains the main source of CO2 emissions. And a reflection of this is in Indian coal power plants capacity. It was steadily reducing over a period of time because of competition on renewables, but also because of growing costs of coal production. In all this situation, we are discussing clean coal solutions for coal industry. The issue with clean coal technology is that let's say you mined 1 million tons of coal. Then you use this coal in gasification process, and after gasification you produced, for example, methanol or fertilizer. All carbon that you took out of the ground in your mining process will end up in the atmosphere. 100% of it. 1 million tons of coal will bring 2.2 million tons of CO2 to the atmosphere. Clean coal technology helps to improve efficiencies, other emissions, but it does not help you to reduce carbon. In order to reduce carbon, clean coal technology can do very effectively capture of carbon, capture of CO2, and after that you need to put it somewhere. And that's where carbon capture and sequestration comes in. Now, where you put it? This is the map of saline aquifers distribution around the world. And they are the preferred target for carbon sequestration. If you look at India, India is devoid of saline aquifers. They are very limited. It's just not there. On the other hand, if you look at the coal distribution across India, it is just about everywhere. I would like to tell you that coal is an excellent reciprocal of excellent target for CO2 injection, because CO2 is absorbed, physically absorbed on coal, And it is a major sink for CO2 emissions. This advantage of this has to be taken. So now what we propose from this general discussion, I would like to take you to our specific proposal. What should coal do? Our position is that it will remain as one of the main sources of energy and hydrocarbons in Asia. Unfortunately, we cannot solve this problem by, just some kind of cosmetic measures. What we propose is that coal industry actually evolves and builds on existing coal assets, produces clean energy, hydrocarbons, keeps workers safe, prevents air pollution, eliminates ash storage, competes with natural gas on price, and can afford carbon capture and sequestration. Essentially, coal industry can become the lowest CO2 producer per unit of energy. And this is the way for survival. Evolution is critical. That's how beautiful birds came to be from dinosaurs. I represent the company that is providing underground coal gasification for commercial projects in different places. It's a technology that allows you to mine coal by drilling holes into coal seam and converting this coal into syngas, hydrocarbon. This hydrocarbon can be used for power generation or as raw material for chemicals. This is about CO2 sequestration. Essentially, we are taking CO2 from our gas that is compressed, and this very efficient process of capturing CO2. And we can put this CO2 back into the depleted cavities that we create. So we essentially continuously creating the storage facility for our own CO2. This process was perfected in the recent years, and it is applied, we are preparing to apply it in Canadian project. I will tell you about that. All these products can be made out of clean syngas. So they cover, I think, everything that India needs, even if you don't use coal for energy. And it's important to do it. Consumption of India, petroleum in India, is 2018 was 202 million metric ton. India pays a year $10 to $12 billion for making up for paying for imports of petroleum products. One plant in South Africa, capacity of 22.5 metric ton of petroleum products, equivalent crude, per day, Sasol Secunda, gives you 8 million metric ton of crude a year. So 25 plants like Sasol plant in South Africa can cover full consumption of India of hydrocarbons. This will cost approximately $300 billion. So it is 25 years worth of Indian imports. So I would say that this is a policy issue, and gasification with chemical use of coal can be alternative to imports. Big question is, though, what do you do with the excessive carbon? Sasol is the largest single-point carbon emitter in the world. They're using 40 million tons of coal a year, and they're emitting enormous amount of CO2. So it may not be a good idea to do it this way. Now, about our costs. This is cost of electricity. It is about $30 US per megawatt hour. This work was done for Gulf area in the USA. And the study was done by Black & Veatch, American engineering company. This is the cost of urea. I just heard that there is a plant coming up, urea plant using coal. What we compare here is the cost of urea from conventional gasification, the gasification that you can import from technology that you can use from air products, for example, and underground coal gasification in similar conditions. You will see that while urea from underground coal gasification is competitive in the market, the urea from conventional gasification is priced above the market. So it cannot be actually good. But also, they are still emitting all the waste carbon. And that's what will happen with the plant that is being built here as well. Now, I want to give you an example of what can be done example of producing methanol. This is the work that was done with Black & Veatch. It's a study, but this work is implemented in Canada, in Alberta. So the main project is at the depth of 1,500 meters. It's 12 meters thick coal seam. And what we have here is the performance. And I give you cost and the CO2 emissions of this project. Compare it to natural gas. Natural gas is a darling of environmental groups, and people believe that it is the best thing that can be used for chemical products. Here is the cost of methanol from our project in Alberta. It's $54 per metric ton, and natural gas, typical cost of methanol from natural gas is about $120. This is US dollars. And in terms of emissions, carbon emissions from our project are about 235 kilos of CO2 per ton of methanol, and significantly less than from natural gas. What it tells you is that there is a coal-based technology that can use indigenous coal in India. And it can give you cheaper product and give you lower CO2 emissions. And there are no subsidies for this. It doesn't require any kind of assistance. So this is technology that gives you about 70% savings in CO2 emissions over a natural gas-based plant. About 55% savings in cost. And if it is deployed at large scale, it can reduce the emissions of fossil fuels and their contribution in global carbon cycle. Now I'll give you a couple of examples of these projects, practical projects. That's the project that we are working on in Canada, in Alberta. It's central Alberta. We're targeting coal seam that is 1,500 meters deep. The company is called Civictus. They're building fermentation plant. So the syngas will be converted to methanol, and methanol will be using a feedstock for fermentation. They're holding 2.7 billion ton of coal, and we finished preliminary engineering. I can tell you that this project is of great interest to any environmental people because it actually reduces CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. For details, you can ask the company itself. And this is the first project that we started in India. We worked for the last 2 years with Tata Steel in Jamadova group of collieries. Many of you know this. It's in Jaria coal field. There are 18 coking coal seams down to the depth of 1,400 meters. This mine is 100 years old. Group of collieries is 100 years old. There's about 8 million ton only left. So we did feasibility study for 340 megawatt power plant. CO2 emissions are 330 kilos of CO2 per megawatt hour. Natural gas is about 400 kilos, so it is better than natural gas. We also did the feasibility for 1.5 million ton per annum direct ore reduction plant. Essentially, in the depleted mine, we found 400 million ton of coal and extended the life of useful life of mine by 100 years. This is the last thing that I want to show you. This is how this is done, and India has enormous number of abandoned mines where coal is deeper than is possible to mine. This is the technology that we are planning to deploy in Jamadoba. We're conducting a gasification process under the worked out coal, and the CO2 is captured in a supercritical state. It is pumped into lower seams. The seams that are at the bottom, they are not productive, they are high ash, but they are a good recipient for CO2. As a result, we are able to produce electricity or DRI with very low carbon footprint. And that concludes my presentation. What you see is the gas that we have produced in New Zealand at the depth of 540 meters. And further information is on our website. Also on this brochure that all of you have, this is a program of this conference. There is a spread that gives you more information on what we have done, our past projects, and what we can do. Thank you very much. I actually have also several recommendations, but if I can do it later if you want.